The grief manifests as weeping, literal outcries for the loss of her right breast to cancer, alongside the loss of other lesbian women to the illness and the destabilization of her identity. She says that she could either love her body or remain forever alien to herself. I find this particularly poignant when relating Frank's idea of medical colonization. In her new altered state, Lorde felt alienated, invaded, and colonized not only by the experience of the mastectomy itself, evident for her expectation of seeing her body as a ravaged, war-torn battleground on page 44, but in the expectations forced upon her body by organisations post-mastectomy. The prosthesis itself doesn't even match her skin colour, another form of colonialism and another invasion of Lorde's body and morals that she defies, and in doing so defies society's enforced invisibility on women who have one breast, are black and proud, as she says, or are lesbian and proud. Lorde writes the cancer journals as an outcry and defiance to the institutions who are comfortable through making other women, like her, unseen and unheard. This is why it is important that Lorde says the next point. At home I wept and wept and wept, finally, and made love to myself endlessly and repetitively until it was no longer tentative. Here, Lorde is not ashamed of her sexuality, and instead uses masturbation to explore and acquaint herself with her new body and all its implications. Her grief and pain over losing a part of her identity is channeled into more productive measures, hence empowering herself by embracing her new life with all of its pains. The very act of openly articulating her unashamed sexual self-expression is a form of activism, empowerment, and defiance, where there is social prejudice against powerful self-sexualizing women who challenge the gender hierarchy. Lesbian sexuality that isn't for the benefit of men is also something that often goes unsaid, along with Lorde's note that women in their 40s and 50s begin to become desexualized in society and culture. Lorde outpours her psychological and physical pain, as well as her rage at the colonization of her body, into an outcry of defiance, where she is no longer tentative, but powerful once more. To transfer from this theme to the next, I've included this quote. If we are to translate the silence surrounding breast cancer into language and action against this scourge, then the first step is that women with mastectomies must become visible to each other, for silence and invisibility go hand in hand with powerlessness.
I am now going to talk about the articulation of pain as a shared experience, or more precisely, is the articulation of pain more or less empowering if it is a shared experience? So, the first quote I chose: the women who sustained me through that period were black and white, old and young, lesbian, bisexual, and heterosexual, and we all shared a war against the tyrannies of silence. They all gave me a strength and concern, without which I would not have survived intact. Within those weeks of acute fear came the knowledge, within the war we are all waging, with the forces of death, subtle and otherwise, conscious or not, I am not only a casualty, but a warrior. So the fact that Lorde and the other women have articulated their pain is empowering to one another. They belong to different groups within society and otherwise would have little in common with each other. They might not have even met had it not been for their illness. If they had remained in silence, they would not have known the similarities of their suffering. The experience would not have been shared, and they would not have been able to support each other to the same extent. However, only sufferers of chronic pain and cancer can be part of this community that Lorde is part of. Only those suffering from pain will truly know how agonizing it is. And we are only sharing in Lorde's pain because she has documented her experience. Despite reading her illness narrative, we cannot understand because we are not experiencing that pain. And this ties into what Whelan is saying on the right-hand side, that those of us not in pain only know about the experience of those in pain by their illness narratives because pain is essentially private and can only be known by others if made public, even then we can only sympathise, we can't empathise. Here, though, Whelan is talking about women who have endometriosis, which is an extremely painful condition where uterine tissue grows outside of the uterus. And as a chronic pain sufferer, Lorde would be able to empathise with women with endometriosis, but would not necessarily feel as if their pain is a shared experience, even if everyone involved articulates their pain. And this is because the causes of pain are different, and therefore the empowerment of chronic pain sufferers comes from the shared experience of those suffering from the same condition rather than the pain itself. Likewise, those of us who are not chronic pain sufferers and who are not cancer patients can still be inspired by stories of bravery and strength, but can empowerment work the other way? Can those of us who are not chronic pain sufferers or cancer patients inspire those who are? And that leads on to the next slide and the next quote. I do not forget cancer for very long, ever. That keeps me armed and on my toes, but with a slight background noise of fear. Carl Simonton's book, Getting Well Again, has been really helpful to me, even though his smugness infuriates me sometimes. The visualizations and deep relaxing techniques that I learned from it help make me a less anxious person, which seems strange because in other ways I live with the constant fear of recurrence of another cancer, but fear and anxiety are not the same at all. So to discern who belongs to the community that can share the experience with Lorde, we also need to see who is not in the community. So because Simonton is not a cancer patient, nor a chronic pain sufferer, he is not in the community. Therefore, we know that those who are in the community and who can share the experience of Lorde must have those things, those conditions, in order to qualify. If we compare the empowerment that Lorde gets from those she has shared the experience with, there is quite a large difference to the empowerment she gets from Simonton, who she has not shared the experience with. She talks about the women who got her through her treatment as helping her to survive and to stay intact, and keeping her sane and helping her through really difficult times. Whereas Simonton alleviates her anxiety, and it's no less a noble thing, but it's not quite the same as literally helping someone to get through the day and stay strong and survive. So Lorde is certainly more empowered by those who have shared her experience than those who've not. However, is this feeling of community, is sharing your experience a choice? Can being part of a community actually be disempowering? And this leads on to the next slide. It is commonplace to speak of social groups as if they were capable of the same sorts of activities as individuals. We say, Germany won the World Cup, the United States invaded Iraq, and the world mourned the passing of Nelson Mandela. In doing so, we attribute agency, belief, and emotional states to groups themselves. This is a quote from Timothy Burns, and he is not talking about illness specifically, but he is talking about what makes what makes a community, what makes that sense of belonging and a shared experience. It leads me to think, wow, do we risk stereotyping and generalizing cancer patients and chronic pain sufferers by assuming they all have the same agency, belief, and emotional states, as Burns says? Often outsiders, often those who do not suffer from cancer or chronic pain, will assume the experience of one patient is the same as another, and the resulting emotion is pity, which is not only disempowering to the patient, but gives the power back to the illness and back to the pain itself. Therefore, those who have not shared the experience can only be limited in the amount of empowerment they can give to someone with cancer. So this leads on to the next slide. The sense of community and the fact that a shared experience is communal is not for those of us who belong outside of the community. It is not there for us to make generalizations, but it is rather there to support those who are experiencing illness and are experiencing pain. For example, the podcast You, Me and the Big C originally consisted of 3 women who have cancer or who have had cancer, and the topics they often talked about were rarely discussed in television or film because they were less glamorous than the public likes to imagine. And so it provided a new opportunity for cancer patients to relate their experience to someone else and actually hear, well, that is similar to what I experienced, that is different to what I experienced, but it creates this sense of community, which in turn creates support, it creates a network. At times, the podcast is humorous and self-deprecating, which is, again, a side of cancer we rarely see. It's usually entirely portrayed as miserable, but there are moments of humour still. But there are also difficult moments in the podcast. For example, one of the presenters, Rachel Bland, actually announced that her cancer had become terminal, and we rarely see someone tell others this moment. If we do, it's fictional, but it was a very empowering thing for those people who are going through cancer and who are terminally ill, because terminally ill people are rarely given a voice on TV, on radio, and in film.
I will now be discussing the articulation of pain as a tool for healing the self and others, therefore a means of empowerment. I will begin by sharing a passage from one of our secondary sources in our theoretical framework. Narrative increases self-awareness by enabling reflection and formulation of experience. Experience is an integrated, conscious construction that is formulated by linking recollection, perception, and expectations, some of which may be out of conscious awareness. In such a process of reflection, patterns in experience may be discovered, as well as explanation, meaning, and coherence, which lie not in life experiences themselves, but rather in reflection and organization of experience. I find that this excerpt does a great job at highlighting why exactly the act of writing an illness narrative, or, for example, personal diary entries of one's journey through an illness, is so helpful. It becomes clear that in the cancer journals, Lorde goes through a sort of psychological transformation, and while perhaps this does not exactly offer her actual physical healing, it does offer her some healing on a psychological, emotional level.